Okay, great. We're going to get started. Again, my name is Ian Andrews. I'm the Executive Director at LakewoodAlive. And the topic today, obviously, is unemployment and COVID-19. This is just such a huge issue with unemployment rates spiking at historic levels in such a short amount of time. A lot of folks have been thrust out of the workforce. And now there's a lot of confusion and trying to figure out how to navigate a complex and antiquated system. And then also, how do the different sectors work, and how did 1099s now try to figure out navigating unemployment, and how is it relative to PPP? So there's a lot of things that have been asked over the weeks about unemployment, and my colleague Allison Urbanik, our Housing and Internal Operations Director, who is joining me, she's going to help us with questions. We'll talk about that in a moment. She and I really were hearing from so many folks about unemployment that we said we have to try to get some sort of a webinar and a discussion around this topic. So we're thrilled that you're here with us today. Please type in your questions in the thought bubble. Allison will be reviewing them. We will ask questions after each section. We have 3 different sections that we're going to get to. And if it's specific to that section, then we will ask it then. If it's a little more broad or involves somebody else who's going to present a little bit later on, we'll ask those questions just as appropriate. So please type in your questions. We are looking forward to hearing from our team, and so let's get started. So here's the agenda. We will simply just go into a little bit about the work that we're doing, and then also the program supporting small businesses. Our panelists will go to the presentations, and then at the end, questions and answers for anything that wasn't asked throughout. We are a nonprofit community development organization in Lakewood. We were founded in 2004, and our mission is to foster and sustain vibrant neighborhoods. The primary programming is around housing outreach, making sure everyone lives in healthy and safe housing. Our small business development piece, working with 3 different merchant associations, businesses from throughout the community, trying to help them succeed, connect them to financial resources, keep them connected with each other, put on programming and events, while also helping to find space for businesses to locate into Lakewood. And then quality of life events, putting on large scale events that just kind of reinforce why Lakewood is such a great community to live and work and to visit. Right now, with regard to COVID-19, we've really launched with small business programming in partnership with the City of Lakewood and Chamber of Commerce. The 3 organizations are working hand in hand and have been doing so right out of the gate as this was emerging to try to be as helpful and supportive as possible. The city was able to put forth rent relief. We've been trying to provide access to financial programs and resources, including a loan product through First Federal Lakewood, an emergency bridge loan, which has helped out a lot of businesses. Developed a small business task force with the mayor. She's shown a lot of leadership in many different aspects of this pandemic and has been helpful in small businesses. According to the merchant associations, we just got off a call with about 15 merchants, probably 15 minutes ago, trying to connect folks with expertise, which is what we're doing today, and then navigating all the federal programming and advocacy with public officials. So our presentation partners today, joining us from Cuyahoga County, Michelle Pomerantz. She is the Director of the Department of Regional Collaboration. We have our friend Mason Pisek with Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. He's a staff attorney in the Economic Justice Unit. And then at Yourkvitch and Dibo, a law firm that works with nonprofits. We've had a great relationship with their firm for a long time. Catherine Donnelly is joining us. So what we're going to do, we have 3 different presentations. I'm going to pivot from this one into Cuyahoga County. Michelle, if you could get us started, I'm going to pull up your presentation. And then as you're ready for me to advance the slides, just say next slide and we'll keep it going. Again, folks, please put your questions into the thought bubble and we'll do our best to get them answered. So Michelle, if you want to take it away, let's get started.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. You can hear me just fine, right?
Yes, I can. Go right ahead.
Before we go to the next slide, we just received information from the state of Ohio that the new Ohio unemployment claims are down 32,000 compared to previous weeks. So I want to make sure that as we consider all the information today, This is a constantly fluctuating, the unemployment is still going to be for a long time a big issue, but having a 32,000 drop off from one week to the next could be for a variety of reasons, including the stimulus checks and some people that maybe just are getting too frustrated to even apply. We're not sure why those numbers have dropped down, but this is a very timely conversation. I want to thank you for that. You can go to the next slide. Cuyahoga County, through the executive of Arvin Budish, has been trying to work very hard with our state and federal advocates to make sure that we are doing everything we can to provide as many supports for the nearly 1 million Ohioans who have filed for unemployment. As the slide shows, it's about 18% of the entire workforce. I know personally, and sometimes when you look at these numbers, they're just numbers, but if you consider in your own personal relationships, my son is unemployed, my best friend is unemployed. I mean, it's a staggering number. It seems to be that when somebody does get through to the unemployment line and get a check, it's like they're winning the lottery instead of getting what they're, duly need as citizens and employees of Ohio. So while I strongly believe that the state of Ohio is doing what they can in terms of support for helping open up those lines, it is still, as stated in these numbers, a very devastating outlook for all of Ohio and the country as well. So jobless claims for the last 6 weeks have been almost 342,000, more than 715,512 combined total claims than Ohio has reported for the last 2 years. I know that most of you are familiar with the 2008 crash. This is bigger and much further and much what we believe is going to be even longer lasting. Eligible Ohioans began receiving an additional $600 in a weekly unemployment compensation last week. That was part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, the CARES Act. That $600 extra that's coming from the federal government is paid from and only by the federal government. So as the county usually would have a responsibility to pay for some of the unemployment costs, this extra $600 is coming straight from the federal government, which we are grateful because that saves up some funds for Cuyahoga County to provide for their programs. The interesting piece about the extra $600 in weekly unemployment compensation, it's a great opportunity if you are unemployed, but if you are a small business employer, it can present an issue when trying to call folks back to work because they may not be as motivated because they may make more money due to this one-time funding from the federal government to stay on unemployment. Couple that with the fear of how safe the work environment is going to be and the potential risk of being infected with COVID-19. This is a real tug and pull on helping the employees versus employers in finding ways for Ohio to recover. I'll stop it there. Are there any questions or should we save them all to the end, Ian?
We will just continue on, but we'll ask questions of you at the end of your presentation before we transition into legal aid. Go right ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So the state of Ohio, for the next slide, has paid more than $1.45 billion to more than 481,000 claimants, according to the state figures. We know that those members of those self-employed, those 1099 employers who, as I mentioned earlier, I like to think about it in terms of people, not numbers. My best friend had a very successful salon business that was completely wiped out and has been without the ability to work for over 8 weeks now. And without there being a portal in the Ohio unemployment system for people that are on 1099s to even claim unemployment, it has been a very big struggle for her. The good news is Lieutenant Governor John Husted and the Director Hall from the Unemployment Agency have been working to provide a portal for 1099 people to claim unemployment. They pledged to back pay from the date that they were forced to stop taking customers, but we're still at least 2 weeks away from them being able to apply. If there are any 1099 businesses who are on this call or any that you know, they can pre-register, which will help them expedite the timeliness of getting those payments. But we're still, as I mentioned earlier, a week away from that. Nationally, another 3.8 million initial jobless claims were filed last week, and according to the U.S. Department of Labor, brings the 6-week unemployment rates to 30 million, approximately 20% of the country's workforce. More than 1.4 billion in unemployment payments have been distributed to the 481,000 claimants in the last 6 weeks. So we've tried to work with ODJFS to help support their call center, but again, in the time of COVID-19, hiring, ramping up, even getting employees into the offices, everything has had a delay based on some of the safety precautions that people are trying to make. I want to go to the next slide and give you a little bit of an idea of what some of the resources for small businesses the counties have been able to help with. We have established in partnership with the Economic Community Development Institute and some other entities a small business resource center. These are live people who will take calls daily between Monday and Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. The phone number is on the screen. It is 216-452-9714. The people answering the calls have background in small business and small business loans. They're there to help navigate, even if you're calling about unemployment, and also ways that you can find loans either through the federal PPP or through the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan to help small businesses stay afloat in these times. Before I go to the next slide, I know this call is about unemployment in businesses, but I wanted to make sure that you understand that the county is also working to provide as much personal protection equipment through their emergency management system to first responders. We're working to help support ways that we can keep homeless people apart and away from being contaminated. We're working with domestic violence groups to help support families who are unable to leave their house, and we're working to provide that net of support services for families who have needed the help in the past, but due to the COVID-19 lack of funding, can use a little more help right now. We're working to provide as much funding as possible to the food banks and other food networks to be able to help support them as well. And then going on to the next slide, you can see that we've this small business stabilization loan was with partnerships, again, with ECDI, the Cleveland Foundation, Key Bank, and some other partners. They created a small business stabilization fund to help small neighborhood-based businesses throughout Cuyahoga County during this pandemic. The first round of loans were announced, I think, April 17th, and the window for application closed April 23rd. But that grant fund totaling $4.6 million awarded in individual 2,500 grants to local businesses. The announcement of who received those grants should be in the next day or so. Another round of those stabilization grants will be announced as soon as tomorrow. Armin, the county executive, usually announces these things at the Friday Board of Health updates with the County Board of Health Director, Terry Allen. The next round of stabilization grants will be based on those businesses throughout Cuyahoga County, and I believe will have an emphasis on the businesses like salons and restaurants that have not been able to get back to work as of this week. These loans can be used for businesses that have less than 20 employees to cover costs including payroll, inventory, rent, utilities, and fixed costs. The website for a whole COVID-19 resource page, including details of all the programs I've mentioned, is at www.cuyahogacounty.us. Again, there's going to be another round of grants. We had originally thought that we would make $5,000 grants, but when the first announcement was made, there were thousands and thousands of people who applied. So we dropped it down to 2,500, and I believe there's 200 recipients throughout across the county that have received these grants. The executive and the development department realized that $2,500 is not a big, huge chunk of change, but hopefully it can help support until those extra funds come in, either for the 1099 small businesses or their ability to reopen soon by the governor's state of Ohio stay-at-home orders lifted. Finally, as the director of regional collaboration, I work to support relationships between the mayors and the county, and I also work to help support advocacy on behalf of the county, and we have been working with both senators and our members of Congress, as well as our state legislators, to help support a fourth package, a federal package to come through that would provide direct supports to municipalities and provide flexibility on any of the previously funded dollars, so that we can work to find ways to support the loss of revenue that we're all experiencing. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or any further comments that you'd like me to address.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And Allison has been fielding some questions. First, I want to thank County Councilman Dale Miller for really being a champion and a leader on trying to support not just all aspects of this, but small businesses, and for being able to make the connection with Michelle. I know the councilman is on the webinar, so Councilman, we appreciate your help. We do have a lot of questions to get to and more panelists. So Allison, if there's anything to ask, go right ahead.
Sure, thank you, Ian. I have a couple questions that we're going to hold to the end that are more general, but I have two that address the $600 federal unemployment addition. So we have two folks asking about this additional $600. Obviously, we've already talked about how it's making it a little bit difficult to get people to want to come back to work, especially if they're making more money with the $600 a week than they were when they were working. So the one question is, why are they doing this? You know, this additional funds, it is going to present a problem bringing people back to work. I don't know if there's any insight on that. And then the other question is, it seems like it's going to be tough to bring people back if they're getting $600 plus unemployment. Some are making money in a week, more money in a week than they did in the 2 weeks. My question is, if I bring back some of my workers back part-time, are they going to take the $600 away? Can they still collect partial unemployment? And then there is a follow-up to that. The next question is, what happens if my workers refuse to come back to work? So I know that's a lot to unpack, but if we can address any of that right now, that would be helpful.
So as I'm not the expert in the unemployment field, I can tell you, based on what I've been reviewing with the governor's office, as well as with the House had a small business kind of opening back up the government task force. Rocky River, oh no, he's not the councilman anymore. Sorry. Representative Dave Greenspan and State Representative Terrence Upchurch were represented from Northeast Ohio. And we had conversations with them regarding what would be like to opening up. And there were conversations about mandating that if you, as an employer, ask your employee to come back and they don't, that they will no longer be able to work for you. That seems a little harsh in some areas. So I don't know if we have a definite answer from the governor's office on whether or not they will be eliminating that $600. What I can tell you is as an employer, and what I've told my unemployed son, is the ability to reopen he works in the restaurant business, for example, the ability to come back to work. There may not need as many cooks at the restaurants. So it would behoove you to not stay on unemployment and keep the money and get back to work as soon as possible, because eventually, due to the social distancing and changes that are going to have to be made to in restaurants, he may not necessarily be called back if he doesn't go back soon. So I think right now, are you able to get partial unemployment? There's something called shared work that I don't know have as many details about, but I can forward to Ian afterwards, that talks about some employers who are able to provide half-time work, and then the employee can get unemployment and some shared work. These are all case by case and very tricky, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for all businesses, but I would think that could be a consideration for some businesses. The feedback I've received from that about why they're giving the $600 right now is, and again, this is Michelle Pomerantz's view, and my interpretation is that because we have an election coming this year, and because this pandemic is something that we have never experienced before, there has been 4 pretty quick bills passed by the federal government in a time when nothing is getting passed. So the urge for support is there. Usually, when you see a bill such as the CARES Act go through, you have 90 days of comment making and guidance and all these other time-taking things that are passed through. That has not happened this time. The Treasury dispensing this money is also unusual. So these are very unusual times, and I think the rush to be able to support employees by giving them that extra $600, the rush for the PPP and the personal loan programs, some of which went to very large entities and did not necessarily meet the goals of which it was set. It's due in part because of people that are doing this aren't usual folks who are doing this, and it's also because these are elections and politics, and it's very political in nature. The state of Ohio also has, even though it's run by House and Senate and governor are all Republicans, there is still some sort of infighting in between how far do we want the stay-at-home orders to go. And as you saw yesterday, they even are the House is trying to challenge Dr. Amy Acton's ability to make rules about stay-at-home policies. So all I can tell you as employers is to kind of watch and wait and do what you can in terms of getting your own business back on track and ensuring that you're communicating with your employees the importance of coming back when you're able to, in order to have a future, not just one-time funds that are going to run out.
Thank you so much. And just to point out, I think some of this will also be covered when we talk with Catherine Donnelly from Yourkvitch and Dibo. So we're going to hold a little bit on the additional questions, and then we will follow up after her presentation.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We are now going to transition to Mason from the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. So Mason, if you want to go ahead and take it away, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Mason Pesic. I am a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. And if you're not familiar, the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland we are a nonprofit law firm, and we receives federal funding. And our mission is to secure justice and resolve fundamental problems for those who are low income and vulnerable by providing high quality legal services and working for systemic solutions. So we serve Cuyahoga County, Lorain County, Lake County, Cuyahoga County, and Ashtabula County, and cover civil legal services for low income individuals within our service area. I work within the Economic Justice Unit, and my primary focus is employment law issues, where I represent low-wage workers, particularly with wage theft issues, unemployment compensation, discrimination, and retaliation. So move on to the next slide. So my presentation today is going to be worker focused and focusing on traditional unemployment compensation, as well as the new programs that were created by the CARES Act. So to begin, just as a general overview of traditional unemployment compensation in Ohio, it's again, unemployment compensation across the country is run state by state with state funding and federal money, and then employers contribute via taxes. You're well aware with your taxes. It provides employees who are out of work through no fault of their own with temporary partial compensation while they are able and available to work and seeking work. And the general separation requirements are either the employee was discharged without just cause, the employee quit with just cause, or the employee was laid off due to a lack of work. Those are the general categories. And it's flagged this that there's been coverage in the media and I think some framing where it's presented as if an employee can refuse to return to work or quit and just collect unemployment compensation. I'll say as someone who represents folks in unemployment compensation appeals, that's not the case, and it's really difficult to get unemployment compensation if you quit and to provide just cause. So that's not really a major occurrence. The next thing is the new eligibility expansion for the COVID-19 pandemic. So if an employee is ordered to self-isolate or quarantine via a doctor or health professional's order, or for example, if the employer tells an employee they cannot return to work, you would be eligible for benefits. But that does not mean that if an employee personally feels unsafe or feels at the workplace that they don't want to return, that you still be eligible for benefits. So there's a distinction there that if you don't have some kind of documentation giving you advising you to stay at home, you cannot just self-isolate because you don't feel like you're quite ready to go back yet. So, but that also means that if there is an employer that you're reopening and you want an employee to return, but they have documentation that they need to quarantine or self-isolate, then they don't need to return to work and continue to collect benefits. Okay, we can move to the next slide. And then under the CARES Act, there are 3 new programs. The first and the one that's going to be most, I think, is the newest or I guess creates the most interesting new benefits is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Act, or program, or PUA, which provides workers not otherwise eligible for unemployment compensation with unemployment compensation benefits if they're unemployed or underemployed for reasons related to COVID-19. So this would include folks like 1099 workers, the self-employed, individuals who don't have sufficient work history for traditional unemployment benefits, or don't make enough weekly earnings to qualify. The other program is Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, which provides an additional 13 weeks of benefits to workers in addition to the typical state maximum. So in Ohio, that's 26 weeks. With PEUC, that is increased to 39 weeks through the end of the year. Then there is Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, which is the $600 payment. This provides workers receiving traditional unemployment compensation or pandemic unemployment assistance an additional $600 per week until the end of July. In Ohio, due to the way the payments are calculated, that'd be through July 25th of 2020. And then all 3 of these programs are fully federally funded, so they are not going to affect like state funding or taxes or anything like that. So we'll move on to the next slide and dive a little bit more deeply into these programs. So the first is Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. And the purpose of this is to create, to fill gaps in worker coverage under traditional unemployment compensation. So as I mentioned earlier, this is for individuals who are self-employed, seeking part-time work, don't have sufficient work history, exhausted regular unemployment compensation, or there are other considerations in wake of the COVID crisis, which we'll get into on the next slide. But weekly benefits are paid at the same rate as state unemployment compensation, or calculated the same way. But there is a weekly benefit floor of what is half of Ohio's average weekly benefit amount. So that, based off our calculations, that's around $180 or $190 per week. And that's for anyone, regardless of how much you made prior to applying to pandemic unemployment assistance. So you will be paid no less than that per week from the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. These benefits can be paid up to a maximum of 39 weeks, and they apply retroactively to January 27th, 2020 if your unemployment or lack of employment is due to the COVID crisis. So in Ohio, since the cases really didn't start popping up till the middle of March, it's unlikely that folks would be eligible prior to the middle of March. But since this is a federal program, it goes all the way back to the end of January, since the virus was popping up on the West Coast earlier in the year. We'll go to the next slide. And then these are the guidelines for PUA. So you must provide self-certification, which isn't fully defined yet in Ohio. The applicant is partially or fully unemployed and or unable to and available to work because of one of the following. So the applicant has been diagnosed with COVID-19 or has symptoms and is seeking diagnosis. A member of the applicant's household has been diagnosed with COVID-19. The applicant is providing care for someone diagnosed with COVID-19. The applicant is providing care for a child or other household member who can't attend school or work because it is closed due to COVID-19. Applicant is in quarantine or had been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. The next slide. Applicant was scheduled to start work and does not have a job or cannot reach their workplace as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Applicant became the breadwinner for a household because the head of household died as a direct result of COVID-19. Applicant quit their job as a direct result of COVID-19. And I'll pause on this one for further clarification that the DOL, or Department of Labor, put out. This means, for example, that an individual had to go into quarantine because they were diagnosed with COVID-19 and they have lingering health issues that prevent them from being able to go back to their old place of work. So, for example, they have shortness of breath and other health issues following their recovery from COVID. They work in a physical job and they can no longer do that work. That would count as being, they had to quit their job as a direct result. Then also, applicant's place of employment is closed as a direct result of COVID-19, or the applicant meets other criteria established by the Secretary of Labor, which leaves the door open for additional criteria to be established from the Secretary. And I'll just pause on the pandemic unemployment assistance before we dive into PEUC. So an important thing about pandemic unemployment assistance is with these guidelines, if an individual is determined not to be eligible for traditional unemployment compensation because they don't meet the traditional eligibility criteria, they could then apply for pandemic unemployment assistance if they qualify under these guidelines and be eligible, because this is to fill the gaps where traditional unemployment compensation eligibility doesn't apply. All right, thank you. Move on to the next slide. So then there is pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. So this provides an additional 13 weeks of unemployment benefits for an applicant after they exhaust their traditional state unemployment compensation payments. So again, most states like Ohio are 26 weeks. With pandemic, with PEUC, that's increased to 39 weeks total. To be eligible, they'll have to have exhausted their benefits after July 19th, 2019. Also, this program allows states to waive their 1 week waiting period that's generally in place for benefits and will be fully reimbursed for waiving that week. And this is in effect until December 31st, 2020. So to the end of the year, individuals who are unemployed can get a maximum of 39 weeks of payments. All right, moving to the next slide. And this is Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, or FPUC. So this is the program, as we've discussed earlier, that provides that additional $600 per week for workers. It ends on July 31st unless Congress elects to extend the program. And states cannot decrease their calculated benefit payments to compensate for the additional $600. So let's say you're receiving $200 a week from state unemployment compensation from Ohio, and you receive the $600. The state cannot then cut that $200 because you're receiving the $600. You have to receive both payments. And from my reading of the CARES Act and understanding, speaking with others, if you receive even, let's say, $1 of pandemic unemployment assistance or $1 of traditional unemployment compensation for a week, you will then be eligible for that $600. I haven't seen any particular carve out regarding partial unemployment. So if you are partially unemployed, but you are still receiving unemployment compensation of some kind, until July 31st, you still should be eligible for that $600. And then I guess also to answer an earlier question about FPUC and why this is in place, from the rationale that I've heard speaking with other folks in the unemployment compensation space and worker advocacy space, this is meant to represent that during the pandemic, folks are not able to look for additional jobs or additional work. Unemployment compensation is mostly meant to be a partial social safety net, like a partial payment of your paycheck while you're actively looking for work as an incentive to get you to return back to the workforce. The $600 additional payment is meant to make up essentially the other half of what you were missing out in your traditional paycheck. So you're supposed to be a full substitute for a paycheck to since folks are having to stay at home and cannot find additional work. So that was the rationale behind the additional $600 from our reading and discussion. So then the next slide. So this is just a helpful diagram that was put out by the AFL-CIO for workers to give them a sense of how they should apply to different benefits programs and how to know whether you're eligible or not. So I just included this as a quick little diagram that I think that is helpful. And then I guess we move on to the next slide, which is the final slide, I believe. Yes. So these are resources that I have used to, and I continue to use and send as references to clients that I speak with or callers that I speak with for more understanding of how these new unemployment compensation programs work, how they're being implemented, and also how ODJFS is implementing these as well. So the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program has been open for pre-registration as of now in Ohio. Lots of other states have already got it up and running and are getting payments out. I think Ohio is hopefully going to have the application process together by the end of the week. But for anyone who is looking to apply for that or have workers applying for that, even if they want to return to work or returning to work this upcoming week, they still can apply and they still will be eligible for benefits for every week that they were eligible prior to returning to work, even if the application hasn't been open yet. So that's important to remember. And so similarly with traditional unemployment compensation as well, lots of workers are not receiving their payments yet and are being called back to work. If they're being called back to work and still haven't received payments, those payments will still be paid out as back payments because they were still eligible during those weeks. So that's a general overview of unemployment compensation. I don't want to go too into the weeds. Happy to answer any questions. And I guess to reiterate too, my focus is more on the worker side. So I may not have as much knowledge on how this interacts with PPP, which I know Catherine will speak about, but happy to speak about unemployment compensation in general.
Great, thanks, Mason. Allison, do we have any questions?
Yes, so we're going to address a few questions right now that I think really fit into this category. So we have a question from Kieran. If I started the application process for unemployment 6 weeks ago and I did not finish because I got called back to work, I was underemployed during that time and have now found out I could still qualify for unemployment since I was significantly unemployed. Can I go back and apply for those weeks and continue until I'm fully employed?
So that's a good question. So if you're underemployed, you can qualify for benefits and for those back payments as well. The one thing to keep in mind when you are partially employed or underemployed is that there is an offset for where you have to report your income or your wages during each week that you were underemployed. And if your wages are above a certain level, so I believe, I don't have this number off the top of my head, I believe it's around $269 per week. If you were making more than that, which is the maximum weekly benefit amount, that would then make it so you would not receive any benefits and would be and cancel out the benefit amount. But if you make anything below that, so let's say, for example, you're still getting you would be eligible for $1 or $2 of benefits. If you're eligible for those weeks and applied, then you would get that $1 or $2 per week from the state, supposedly, and then also get that $600 from the federal government from the time that FPUC has been in effect.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think this your explanation also answers this question, but I want to make sure. We have a question from Laura that says, can you file for unemployment if you still have a job but have been laid off from your additional part-time seasonal jobs?
Yes, you can. As long as you report your full income when you're applying for unemployment compensation or pandemic unemployment assistance, they will provide partial unemployment benefits to folks who are partially, laid off or have a reduction of hours. It's just the question of, are you receiving enough money that that it would cancel out any kind of benefit payment you would receive. So that's a calculation that ODGFS does when you apply for benefits.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Chris. They say, I'm an independent contractor and did receive PPP and have applied for EIDL. Am I able to apply for unemployment to cover periods not covered by 8 weeks of payroll provided with the PPP?
So you should, I believe, if you apply for PPP, that can affect eligibility for unemployment compensation programs. But if you've already applied, I don't think there is any issue with applying for pandemic unemployment assistance. The only thing to make sure that you do is you report any income that you received, so personal income for your own personal payroll from PPP when you apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. So as long as you're reporting what your weekly income was during those weeks and reflects, any kind of amount you got from PPP, I don't think it hurts to apply. We don't have really firm guidance yet from what I've done from my research on this topic. Catherine may know more, that really tells us exactly how PPP and PUA payments interact with one another. But again, the worst thing that happens if you apply to PUA and you're denied, there won't be any kind of penalty or anything like that.
Great, thank you. We have a question, and I think this will address a few questions from Linda and from Karen. If someone didn't work enough hours to qualify for traditional unemployment, would they qualify for PUA if they were laid off and or underemployed?
Absolutely. So PUA is designed specifically for that type of situation. So it's meant to cover, and as I think I said before, like fill in those gaps that traditional unemployment compensation creates. So it's there for folks who didn't work enough hours or didn't make enough. So you would be guaranteed at least that floor benefit amount of $180, $190 per week, and in that additional $600 to the end of July as well.
Great. And just for Karen and Linda and other folks, Ian, is it possible for you to send a link to the PUA kind of holding page on the unemployment website?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to get that out.
Great.
I guess
Thank you.
I'll do a quick plug while I'm thinking of it. I forgot to add this in. We also have a worker information line at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland right now where workers can give us a call and then get connected with someone to answer questions about whether it's unemployment compensation or if they have questions about returning to work. They can give us a call, and that phone number, I believe I have handy right here, is give this maybe in a follow-up email, 216-861-5899. And it's also on our website. So if you know workers or you are working, have further questions about this, you definitely can give us a call there.
Great. Thank you. So we
Anything
have a
else,
question
Allison?
here.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, a couple more here. Sorry, there's a lot going on here. So I do have a question from Cindy. If you were the sole proprietor of your business and your business slowed considerably due to COVID, but did not stop completely, are you eligible for unemployment?
It's hard to say without a fuller analysis of the context. I think if your business and income decreased significantly to a point that your wages sank below, let's say that a certain amount, you may be eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance. Again, I don't think it would hurt to apply, and I guess that's my general thought. Like with most things, pandemic unemployment assistance is created to be a broad program to reach as many folks as possible who are being affected by the economic crisis created by the COVID pandemic. So I would think that we can apply, and depending on could be eligible, though it's hard to say without a further analysis of exactly what's going on. But applying for pandemic unemployment assistance, I think again, does not hurt. And the worst thing that happens is you'll be deemed ineligible.
Great, thank you. We have a question from James. Do people that are furloughed get compensation since they are underemployed at the time they are off work?
If you are furloughed and you are underemployed to the degree that you're making less than $269 per week, or the amount, or again, that's my placeholder, but the amount that is the weekly benefit amount or earnings amount, then you could get some support from unemployment compensation. But if you're still making, let's say, like 80 to 90% of your regular wage while you're furloughed, it's unlikely that your income decreased enough to be eligible for unemployment compensation. But again, it depends on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you. And I believe that we've covered this, but just in case we haven't, can people go back and apply for back pay that they haven't applied for yet through unemployment?
From my understanding, from the guidance I've seen, that yes, because you were eligible for unemployment during that time, and you were, and due to the technical difficulties of the program and the administrative issues, if you apply now, I believe you still should be eligible for those back payments. There may be different guidance coming out of ODJFS now, but what we've been seeing over and over again is that if you've been unable to collect benefits and ODJFS has had trouble processing them, then you should still get back payments for when you were eligible, particularly for PUA, since PUA you haven't even been able to apply for yet, is something that you'd be eligible for those back weeks as well.
Great, thank you. I think we're caught up for questions for the moment, if you want to continue.
Great, thanks, Allison. We're going to go right to Catherine Donnelly from Yourkvitch and Dibo. So Catherine, please go right ahead.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be with you today. Just quickly, I'll introduce myself and my firm. I'm the Senior Associate at Yourkvitch and Dibo. We are a full-service law firm for small businesses and nonprofits. We do a lot of real estate, but we also end up doing unemployment stuff, employment, I should say. Particularly right now, it's becoming an issue. We can go on to the next slide. So before I continue with this slide, I do want to just quickly address PPP. Most of my presentation deals with discrimination law and general unemployment law considerations as you're as a business owner considering calling people back. If you can't call everybody back, or if people refuse to return, what are your considerations and your obligations having to do with that? But I will take questions on PPP, and I also would say it's a great topic for further webinars. So unemployment, just quickly to piggyback on what Mason discussed, if an employee refuses to return to work, generally speaking, that means that they are refusing work and they're not eligible for unemployment. However, if they're refusing to return because of what they can show in their appeal process to be a just cause, they may still be eligible for unemployment. That is an uphill battle, but what we're seeing right now from ODJFS is that one thing that they may, we don't know because guidance is still pending, if any, what they may consider a just cause is if the business is not following responsible Restart Ohio industry sector specific guidelines. So for example, if your sector, if you're in retail and you're required to have your employees all wear masks or have hand sanitizer in high touch locations, and you're not doing that, and the employee can document that, then the employee may have a just cause not to return to work and may retain their eligibility. So one of your responsibilities as an employer when you're calling people back to work is to make sure that you have put those safety precautions into place. We can go on to the next slide. So consult guidance in putting together those policies. Make sure you are make sure you're familiar with what both OSHA and what the state of Ohio has put forward as guidance. One of the key things is going to be communication. In my experience dealing with employment discrimination issues, those employers who do a good job of clearly communicating their policies and getting buy-in from their employees to the extent that they can, those employers are less likely to draw a discrimination claim. So again, what we've heard over and over again is that this is not a one-size-fits-all situation. You will want to try to consider all of the scenarios that your employees may be facing in returning to work and try to have a response to that. And when it comes to determining who comes back, if you're ready to bring people back, but you can't bring everybody back, you want to make sure that you are basing your decision about who comes back on a legitimate non-discriminatory reason. That is that you have a good, sound business reason for what you're doing. For example, you might bring people back based on seniority, and then you want to make sure you're following that with every employee. Similarly, you might find that you need to bring back people based on their skill set, and you want to be able to clearly articulate what are the skill sets that you need right now and why you're bringing back a particular employee. The message coming repeatedly from the DeWine administration right now is that employers should be flexible. And that does create a challenge in putting together clear and consistent policies. If we could go on to the next slide. So again, communication. When you're trying to put together a policy that is clear for your employees, all of this is going to be new right now, and we understand that. I think everybody understands that. But once you've clearly worked out who you're bringing back, how you're going to bring them back, what kind of safety precautions you're going to have in place, you want to make sure that you are clearly communicating those rules with all your employees, including those that you're not bringing back. Make sure that you are following those policies, that you are very consistent with following the policies. You want to put in place a complaint procedure if you don't have one already, that employees can give you feedback and if they are seeing something that they believe is discrimination, or if they believe that you're not following the safety guidelines, that you're giving them an opportunity to respond to that so that they're not put into a whistleblower situation, and that you're not retaliating when you get a complaint. If you get a complaint, investigate it, take it seriously, follow up with the person complaining, document what you're doing in response, and always be aware of, again, people's unique situations, but be aware that when you're talking about discrimination, employment, there are protected classes. When you're looking at disability, make sure that you can take people's temperatures. You can do testing right now, but make sure you're protecting confidential. You're keeping confidential those results. Be aware of protections for age, race, national identity, religion, gender, and in some localities, gender identity and sexual orientation. You just want to be careful that your policies are taking into account what the individual's identity is, and whether, if you're following a clear and consistent policy, the individual's identity should not impact your decision. We could go on to the last slide. Any questions? Sorry, I ran through that super quickly because looks like we're running out of time here.
Yes, we do have questions. Thank you. We will stay on a little bit longer to make sure we get everything addressed, if that's okay with our panelists. So we do have a question that if a worker was furloughed and then laid off while other workers remained on furlough status, can they ask how that decision was made?
Yes, absolutely. They would want to find that out. And the employer on the other side will want to have a clearly articulated reason as to why they are keeping some people on furlough and letting go others. If there's been a decision made that when people return, they will only be able to return a portion of the workforce, that is a legitimate non-discriminatory reason, but the selection of a particular individual, again, would need to follow a clear policy such as seniority.
Great, thank you. And if we could go back to maybe the troubles that I think some business owners are going to be facing, with that $600 federal money. It's been explained, those dollars were there to help catch up on people's paychecks. We're hearing from a lot of people that employees are saying, I don't want to come back to work because I'm going to be making less money, getting put back on with my traditional paycheck. Any insight or recommendations you can provide, Catherine, to our business owners on how to talk them through that, how to explain it, and then what exactly happens if people are refusing to go back to work?
So if the reason that people are refusing to go back to work is because they're making more money on unemployment, that's going to affect their eligibility. It will make them ineligible for the 600. That is, the employer will need to respond. There is ODJFS is providing a link for employers to fill out a questionnaire when an employee refuses to return, and the employee needs to be aware that they could be found to be committing fraud in that instance, and there's overpayment penalties if you are found to have committed fraud against unemployment. It's not just a return of the benefit you've received, but there's an additional penalty on top of that.
Great, thank you. And we'll work to get that link, whether it's during this presentation or if it gets emailed out after the presentation. But we'll make sure that everyone has access to that employee questionnaire link for their reference.
So if I could follow up, I'm sorry, Allison, I just wanted to follow up and say it's important, again, to communicate and make sure that you understand the reason. Because if the reason, in fact, is that they don't think that you're putting in safe policies, then they may be able to overcome the objection that they're They're simply doing it for the increased benefit.
Great, thank you. We are going to be wrapping up here shortly, so if you have any additional questions, please make sure you get those submitted. I do have a general question here from Marcia. So the question is, does anyone know when pandemic unemployment insurance is going to open up? So right now we know that there's a website where you can pre-register. Any insight into when people will actually be able to apply for those benefits?
Hi, this is Mason. So from the guidance we're getting, it was slated, I believe, to open by the end of this week. I've not seen if that's going to be the case or not. I mean, we still have tomorrow. If not, I would assume by next week, because all the guidance we've received for the past several weeks is that the applications will be open by mid-May, and we're getting to that point now.
Great, thank you. I believe we're all caught up with questions for the moment. If you did submit a question and it wasn't completely answered, we do have the contact information here for folks on the screen. I would encourage you to reach out, or if there's a quick clarification you want us to have, please feel free to submit that. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks to our panelists. This is such a huge topic. It was really great to be able to pull together the information. I hope it was helpful to the folks on the call, and as you're navigating the waters, either as an employee, as an independent contractor, or a small business owner. We hope that this has been helpful, and as Allison said, please feel free to follow up. You can see our contact information at LakewoodAlive. Feel free to reach out to me, our partners, Patty Ryan at the Chamber, also Caitlin Millius at the City of Lakewood. I will go back and just show, and we'll send this out within the hour, the contact information for our friends at the county legal aid, excuse me, and Yourkvitch Dibo. So stay tuned for more webinars. We are planning to have discussions. We're targeting Thursdays or end of the week here in the near future. We've got a few different topic ideas. If you have any ideas or things that you are really struggling with, please let us know as we try to continue to build education. This thing is progressing, and now we're evolving into a new state of affairs where reopening, and so many questions about what to do and how to proceed, and we want to try to be as helpful as we can. So everyone, thank you very much. We wish you the best, and stay in touch. All right, have a good day.
I do have, Ian, I have one question.
Yep.
Okay, hold on, folks. So the last question that I have here is the question is from Sarah, the current industry safety guidelines for consumer retail. Does that also include restaurants that are open for carryout? If anyone knows that answer.
I believe those are separate. But I can send you that answer, Allison, after the webinar.
Okay, great. So Sarah, we have your email address. We'll send those over to you as soon as we get those.
And I am remiss, are there any final thoughts from our panelists, anything you'd like to say before we close? Okay, hearing none, everyone, thank you very much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.